Good morning, and welcome to Cozy Horror. It's Friday, everyone. I hope you've made it with all of your fingers and toes intact, and with a monicum of dignity. Let's hope that next week is just as fine as this one. Today, we're going to read 5 stories that most people would probably call emotional horror. I know the snobs over at No Sleep do, and that's why they don't like it. Apparently, they only like to feel fear and not feelings. But I know you guys enjoy a little bit of emotional horror. So today, that's what we're going to get. Our first story is a story about the loss of a wife and maybe the discovery of something she left behind. Let's hear a story about a shadow of her former self.
It all started when my wife died 8 months ago. Susan was everything to me. We'd been together since high school, and it had been love at first sight. We married after graduation, and we spent 18 years together in wedded bliss. I worked as a writer, finding jobs in editing or column writing. Susan working as a receptionist for a friend of my mother's. We spent a lot of time together. My days spent mostly waiting for her to come home. I lived for the moments when we were sitting in front of the TV together or curled up in bed as we talked about our day. We never had children, though it wasn't for a lack of trying. I was afraid she would leave me when she discovered I was infertile. I'd been injured when I was small, but she just smiled and said we'd just have to be satisfied with each other. It was never something we struggled with. Instead of kids, we gave each other our full attention. We traveled as often as we could, ate out often, had date nights at least once a week, and loved each other more than anyone else we knew. Susan was my everything, and I hoped I was hers. She never gave me any doubt that it was so, and those 18 years were the happiest time of my life. They weren't enough, though. 1,000,000 years wouldn't have been enough. I was writing something for some rag that Susan liked to read when I got the call. She had looked over my shoulder that morning before she left, cooing appreciatively as I edited a piece from one of her favorite writers, other than me, of course. She wanted to read it when I was done, and I promised I'd let her see it when she got home. I'd been invited to write a column, too, something they might let me do more often if it did well, and I'd just started fleshing it out when I decided it was time for a second cup of coffee. The coffee maker was burbling happily, filling my mug with liquid happiness, when my phone rang. Thought it might be Susan, letting me know she had made it to work, and I almost didn't answer when I saw it was an unknown number. The telemarketers had been particularly bad lately, and the last thing I wanted was another conversation with someone who wanted to sell me solar panels or extend the warranty on my car. Turned out it was the police. There'd been an accident. They were sorry, but she had passed very quickly, likely instantly, and hadn't felt any pain. My cup smashed as it hit the floor, soaking my feet in hot coffee as I gripped the counter for support. I would need support for the next few months. I was a wreck. My wife had been my whole world, and suddenly I was alone. I couldn't even go into the bedroom for the first 2 weeks. It smelled like her. Her pictures were everywhere. I slept on the couch a lot those days. I didn't even go in there to get my suit. I just bought a new one off the rack for the funeral. It was small. Neither of us had a lot of friends or family, but the girls from the doctor's office were very supportive, very sorry to lose such a dear friend. We buried her in Mountain Hills, a cemetery not far from the house. After they lowered her into the ground, I just sat there, trying to figure out what to do. I was still sitting there when the guys from the funeral home came to pick up the chairs, the sun setting behind me as I watched the hole in the ground where my wife now lay. "Sorry for your loss, mister, but we gotta pack these up now." I just got up and drove home, finding myself sitting on the couch. When the sun came up, it was still sitting there. This became a pattern. The next 2 months are kind of a blur, honestly. I lived my life like that quote from Forrest Gump. When I was tired, I slept. When I was hungry, I ate. And when I had to go, I went. I really didn't leave the house unless I had to, and when I did, I walked. I didn't trust cars after that, and I'm still not comfortable riding in anything with wheels. The walks probably did me good, but I was so lost at that point in my life. She'd been my everything, my whole world, and I just didn't know how to get by without her. I didn't work. My contracts quickly dried up. I wasn't working on my book either, and I'd fallen into a deep funk. If something hadn't pulled me out, I would have probably wasted away right there. Luckily, I suppose, something did. That was when the gifts started showing up. The first one came on Valentine's Day, though I now know that was no accident. I had stepped out in the evening to check the mail, and there it was on the stoop. I almost stepped on it, and that would have been a shame because someone had left my favorites. Sitting there was a bouquet of wildflowers, a box of those dark chocolate truffles Susan had always bought me, and a card. I was stunned for a moment, not quite believing what I was seeing. This was just the sort of thing she would do, too, and I expected her to jump around the corner and surprise me. She hadn't been very large, a wisp of a thing, but she liked to scare people and found it hilarious when she managed to. As the minutes stretched by and no scare seemed incoming, I picked up the stuff and brought it inside. I put the flowers in some water. I had never gotten flowers before, but I remembered that much, and set the chocolates on the table. I opened the card and found a pretty generic card inside, flipping it open to see who had sent it. I snorted as I read it, wondering whose bright idea that had been, but feeling a little better, nonetheless. "From your secret admirer" was written inside, the handwriting fine and spidery, just like hers had always been. As I ate the chocolates, I felt the tears come on unbidden. The taste, the smell, it all reminded me of Valentine's days past. We would sit and watch a movie, curled up on the couch together, while she munched at her Ferrero Rochers and I ate my chocolate truffles. We'd trade sometimes, and I wish now that I could see her eyes light up as I handed her one of my chocolates again. I passed out on the couch a little later, but my dreams were a little brighter that night. After that, I started finding other gifts. Food from my favorite Chinese place, candy, books by writers that I liked. One time, someone even delivered a seafood feast from Sir Crabbington's, and I was halfway through it before I realized it was mine and Susan's wedding anniversary. I waited till after I'd finished before crying this time, but the tears were still there. I never questioned these gifts, but I never looked for them either. I assumed they were from friends or from the girls at the office she had worked at, but their dedication was heartwarming if it was. My wife must have talked about me a lot for them to know my favorite foods and snacks, and I was honestly just happy for a break in the sadness. Each of these gifts made my day a little better, and the pain ebbed away a little more with each new package. Suddenly I was feeling inspired to write again. I had the energy to reach out to my old contacts and try to work. I was running in the evenings. I was doing laundry and dishes, and felt like I might be getting a little better. The gifts were nice, but it was the other things that started to make me wonder if the gifts were all that was being given. Sometimes I would wake up to find that the clothes were folded or the dishes were already done, and I couldn't remember having done them. Other times it would be simpler things easily explained but no less odd. A blanket thrown across me where there hadn't been one before. A pillow under my head when I had slept on the couch and left it in the bed. Sometimes as I came awake a little in the night, it seemed like I could see shadows moving in my house. I would sit up, the living room bathed in the light of whatever TV show I had fallen asleep watching, and look around for the source of the movement, finding nothing. It was weird, but I figured it was probably just my imagination. I'd been through a lot lately. Some mild hallucinations might be expected. It was on one of my jogs when I finally discovered the identity of my secret admirer. I was coming up the hallway, huffing a little from a longer jog than usual tonight, when I saw someone leaving something outside my door. I had to grab the wall for a minute when I first saw her because I thought it might be my wife. She was short, with brown hair that had been cut into a pixie cut. She was dressed normally enough in jeans and a t-shirt, but the high tops were also something that my wife favored. From the back, she looked exactly like my dead wife, except for the hair. My wife had always talked about getting it cut short, but she favored ponytails and braids too much to ever cut it too short. She was bent at the waist, leaving food or something for me, and when I called her name, she jumped. When she turned around, though, I could see that I'd been mistaken. The woman was similar, but her face was different. They could have been sisters, but there were definitely subtle differences. Her nose was rounder, her face less angular, and she just seemed less substantial. I began to wonder if she might be a cousin or something, but I couldn't think of anyone in Susan's family who looked much like her. "Oh my gosh," she said, looking embarrassed. "I guess you caught me. Sorry for being so mysterious. I just didn't want to mess up your morning. I was a friend of your wife's. My name's Anne." She offered me a hand to shake, and I likely looked just as unsure of myself as I took it. I told her to knock next time and come and share a meal with me. She agreed. That began our strange friendship. Anne was just the companion I needed, and we spent 2 or 3 nights a week in my living room. Some of you will lift an eyebrow at that, but it was never anything more than talk. Anne cried as often as I did, and the two of us reminisced over Susan and what she had meant to us. Anne, as it turned out, had known her far longer than I had. The two had been friends since they were children, and Anne told me about Susan's early life in a way that made them almost sound like sisters. The more she told me, the more I wondered why I'd never heard of her before. If Susan had known Anne since they were children, why was this the first time I was meeting her? Many of her stories were things that I had heard before, so they tracked, but any misgivings soon melted away as we spent our evenings remembering. Sometimes she held me while I cried. Sometimes I held her, but it was nice to have someone there in my grief. She had just gotten done with a particularly funny story about how Susan had cut her hair too short and given herself something like a mullet before shaving it down into a sloppy pixie cut when she suddenly began to cry. Her despair was deep, the sobs racking her, and when I went to hold her, she pressed her face against my chest. "I'm sorry, I miss her so much." I held her that night as she wept, and think that was when I started to fall in love with her. It made me feel terrible, but I couldn't help it. She was so much like Susan. Even her voice reminded me a little of my dead wife. I didn't want to move on. I was still trying to process what to do next, but Anne helped a lot, and I got the feeling that she didn't mind being that person for me. Suddenly, she was coming over every night, bringing food or wine, and we spent our evenings together. It didn't seem to bother her that I never wanted to leave the house. Didn't make any difference to her that I didn't cook, but the longer she was in my life, the more that changed. Suddenly, I was paying more attention to my clothes. I was taking on columns for online magazines and selling my short stories again. I was cooking dinners instead of eating takeout, and I felt as if I were getting better. Anne was a big supporter of this, pushing me to get better, and that was when I started to notice that something was a little off about her, something I should have noticed before then. Anne only came by after dark and was unavailable during the day. Anne had a very demanding job, but would change the subject any time I brought it up. Anne would always leave before dawn, if not well before. Anne wouldn't stay at the house, wanting her own space, which I could respect. These things on their own didn't seem so strange, but altogether they made me curious. I'd also wondered why Susan had never talked about Anne before. It was something that had always been at the back of my mind, but now it began to linger like a fishbone in my throat. If they were so close, why had I never met her? If they'd been friends since childhood, why hadn't she been at our wedding, at our parties, our trips, our gatherings of people that had been drawn around us? And Anne had never been seen at any of those. I asked Anne about that one night, and she waved it off, telling me I must have seen her at one of those things. I've been to every gathering you guys have thrown. I was at your wedding. I was at the funeral. I've been with you guys all the way. Made me think I was going crazy, but I couldn't remember seeing her before that night 2 months ago. I thought about going through old pictures, but neither of us had been picture-taking people. We kept our memories inside, not on our phones, though it made it a little difficult to check now. I was hesitant to bring any of this up in front of her as, well, I didn't want her to feel like I was accusing her of anything. Anne had become very important to me, and I didn't want to go back to sitting in my depression on the couch every night. That was until I saw something that I shouldn't have. We'd been watching a movie on the couch, something Susan and I had seen 1,000 times, and I dozed off towards the end. I had laid my head over on Anne, and if it bothered her, she gave no indication. I don't know how long we sat like that, the two of us together on the couch, but when she got up to leave, I came half awake as I mumbled something about seeing her later. She didn't respond, which I thought meant she hadn't heard me. But as I opened my eye a little, I saw something that froze me in my couch divot. The black shadow was standing in the doorway, its back to me as it prepared to step out into the dim hallway. The creature looked like tar, its form more of a feminine insinuation than a fact. It must have had its back to me, but when I inhaled sharply and fell off the couch, it turned back to see what had happened. I was on the floor, breathing harshly and trying to find enough breath to scream when the shadow creature bent down in front of me and spoke in Anne's voice. It's okay. This wasn't how I wanted you to find out, but I suppose it was inevitable." I couldn't find my breath. I looked at the thing that was speaking with Anne's voice, trying to make sense of all of this. What the hell was going on? In my head, I had wondered if Anne was some kind of stalker or a weirdo who was only pretending to know my wife, but this was a little bit beyond anything I had thought about. What? She glanced at the sliding door to our apartment, noticing the sun beginning to peek up and sucking in air. "I don't have time now, but please listen. You have to trust me. I would never hurt you. and I'll explain what's going on. Some of the answers might not make a lot of sense, but I promise I'll tell you what's going on. Just wait till tonight, till I get off, and I'll tell you everything I can. Can you do that?" I nodded, and she returned it slowly. She got up and walked towards the door, but turned back just before passing through it. "I'm still Anne. I'm still the person you've known for the past few months. Just keep that in mind." She walked through the door and left me sitting on the floor of my living room. I was a mess all that day. I didn't understand anything. All I knew was that someone I'd grown pretty close to had turned into a featureless monster right before my eyes. I kept trying to convince myself throughout the day that it had all been a dream, that I was still dreaming, but the longer the day went on, the more I had to come to terms with the fact that it wasn't. That meant that whatever that thing had been, it was coming back here tonight. I'd have to make a choice when it got here. Did I let it in, or did I tell it to go away and lose Anne forever? When the knock finally came, night having crept up on me as I worried the day away, I looked out the peephole to see the same old Anne standing on my doorstep. As I opened the door, she breathed a sigh of relief and asked if she could come in. I let her in, figuring that if the creature had wanted to hurt me, it would have done it before now. "Okay," she said, not sitting as she paced the living room. "I know you've probably got a ton of questions, but just let me tell you my side before you jump to conclusions." She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she tried to find a place to begin. "I didn't lie. I have been with your wife for a very long time. In fact, I've been with her since she was born. Susan and I have gone everywhere together, right up until the day they buried her. I'm Susan's shadow." I squinted at her, not really sure what to make of that. "When your wife died, I was reassigned to someone else. Someone new. Someone very new, but I still remembered you. I wondered how you were and what you were doing. I hoped you were doing okay, and as this little person napped and ate and sat, I knew I had to go make sure you were all right. I had to stay with my new person during the day when the shadows are most noticeable, but at night I was free to roam a bit more. Babies don't move as much as you might think, and with a 7 o'clock bedtime, I was left with a lot of time to kill. I leave at 5 when the sun is coming up, and come back at night so I can see you." She stopped and looked at me in an expectant way, but my mind was altogether unprepared. "So you're Susan's shadow? How?" "Shadows are part of people, but once they're dead, we aren't really needed. I've been with Susan since the start, since the first time she met you, and I fell in love with you right alongside her. I had to know you were safe, to know that you hadn't given up, so I started coming back to our old house. I found you suffering. So I left you gifts to keep your spirits up, little things to make you realize you were still loved. But I got careless. I let myself get seen, but I guess that worked out in the end. Turned out I was hurting too. I missed Susan. I missed her more than I had any of the other people I'd been attached to before. And talking with you helped me get over her, just as it helped you. We helped each other in the end, and that was what we both needed. We became what the other needed, and I'm thankful that you happened along and found me that day. I had questions, all kinds of questions, but the one that stuck seemed the most obvious. If you have someone new that you've attached to, does that mean that eventually you'll have to go? She nodded slowly, like she hoped I wouldn't think of that right away. Eventually, as the person I've been assigned to grows, she'll need me more than just during the day. I may have to stay with her more and more often at night, and that will ultimately mean less time with you. I want to be here for you, but I don't want to stop you from moving on either. You need to get past her, get past me, and eventually return to life as you knew it. You deserve that. You deserve to be happy. I felt the tears leaking down my face, smearing her and turning her into a wavy half-person. Will you stay with me as long as you can? I asked. She nodded. I will. I'd really like that. That was 6 months ago. The little girl that she's become the shadow of, Anne, is starting to move around more, and Anne is happy with her progress. She doesn't think it'll be much longer before she's walking, but she promised that she'll come and see me for a while to come. One day she may decide that the nights are for going out and working, but for now, she's still tossing in her crib before the sun goes down, and that's just fine with me. I don't know how long I'll have Anne for, but I know it would never be long enough. Even as I write this, I know there will come a time when her visits become less and less, and I know that'll be fine too. I had Susan for 18 years, and I'll take whatever time I have with her shadow as a gift.
I suppose, given the circumstances, a shadow is better than nothing. Our next story is about a woman seeking a cure who finds that the disease might not be the worst thing in her life. Let's hear a story about cold comfort.
Well, Miss Lee, this treatment is experimental, but we feel it will improve your condition. All you need to do is sign on the dotted line, and we can schedule you for the first of the week. The doctor tapped the form like a used car salesman trying to sell a sports car with no engine. The kind of salesman who thinks you're too stupid to look under the hood and too desperate to believe the deal is anything but genuine. That was the beginning of the end of my life. My name is Pandora Lee, and this is my story. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with a debilitating bone disease, the kind that causes your bones to be very weak. My doctor sent me to a specialist, and after running some tests and running up a small fortune in bills, he wanted to try an experimental treatment to harden my bones. I was hesitant. Who wouldn't be? But could I really afford to be in my condition? The following week, I arrived for my first treatment. The waiting room was the same bland area I'd seen 1,000 times. The sort of forgettable facade that hides the work that goes on beyond that unassuming blue door, between the show floor and the butcher's shop. Children moved beads along a wire maze as parents and patients looked through magazines that had been current about 10 years ago. The smiling face of President Obama looked up from a table, he and Martha Stewart sharing space with Better Homes and Gardens and Highlights magazine. The magazines were only slightly more interesting than the paperwork on the clipboard I was muddling through, but I tried my best to ignore them. "Miss Lee, we're ready for you," a young blonde-haired woman in scrubs called to me, smiling brightly as she led me through the oddly dark blue door and into a hallway of the same color. Despite the buzzing overhead lights, the paint scheme made the whole place look shadowy, and I shuddered as she led me to a little room farther down. She showed me to a small, sterile room, with only a gurney and an IV stand to break up the emptiness. The room was blessedly brighter, a kind of eggshell white that verged on eye-watering, and I stepped inside and handed her the clipboard. "Please take a seat and get comfortable, Miss Lee. The doctor will be here very shortly." As I lay there waiting, the clean white paper crinkling under me, I had a gut feeling that this was a bad idea. I chalked it up to nerves, though. It was just another exam, just another series of tests, just another meeting that would end predictably. I should have listened to my gut. As the doctor walked in, he smiled his best crest kid smile, and I imagined I could see spit stains on his teeth. I wish I could tell you that he was an ugly little man, some goblin who scared me or made me wish a nurse had stayed to observe our interactions. but he was actually very plain looking. Thinking back now, I can't tell you anything about him, other than his big grin and his neat little mustache. It might have been easier if he were a monster, but I guess life is rarely easy. Well, Miss Lee, as you know, this is still experimental. It's in the early trial phases. You'd honestly be one of our first human trials for the treatment, but we feel you are the perfect candidate. I stared at him blankly, unsure whether he expected me to be flattered or break out into applause. He looked uncomfortable, clearly not getting the response he was expecting. Calling the pretty blonde nurse from earlier, he asked her to strap me down and told me to relax. The straps were scratchy, the clasps sitting cold against my arm, and I found it hard not to squirm as she slid the IV in. The doctor reached into the hall and wheeled out a large metal canister. It looked like a fire extinguisher, the old kind with a hand crank, except for the face mask on the end, which is undoubtedly going over my face. He must have noticed my apprehension, because the too big grin made a return appearance. Don't worry, Miss Lee. It's all very safe. He placed the mask over my face, the smell of cleaner mixing with something sickly sweet and acidic. Breathe deep, he prompted, and I took my first breath, his voice sounding as if it were coming to me from the lip of a deep hole. You'll wake up in no time. Then it all went black, my last memory being the stuff I breathed in tasting like the smell of cleaner my mother had always used when I was young. Then I didn't think about anything for a while. I was floating for a while, my body as light as a feather, and I could have gladly floated in that void forever. When I dropped back into my body, however, it was worse than any falling dream I'd ever had. I opened my eyes and looked around frantically, my body still splayed across the gurney as the canister pumped whatever was in the tank into my lungs. I felt a surge of pain rip through my whole body, and I jerked fitfully against the restraints. The scream ripped up my lungs, the gas clouding my mouth as I choked on my anguish. The nurse ran in, trying to calm me to no avail. Calm down, Miss Lee. We don't want you to damage your bones while the treatment is doing its job. The pain is only temporary. The doctor will be in to give you something for it and explain everything. Her words did nothing for the pain that drilled into my bones, and after what seemed like hours, the doctor finally came in. He had a needle in his hand. The tip slid easily into the IV, and he filled the saline bag with something. It was cold, the liquid flowing in like ice, but the relief was immediate. I lay back gasping, the sudden lack of pain almost as jarring as the pain had been, and the big smile hovered over me like a specter. The first treatment is always the most painful, but it seems to be a success so far. You might have some joint stiffness for a few days, but that's to be expected, as the treatment hardens your bones. As the gas hissed and the ice brought sweet relief to my inflamed bones, I lay there drinking in grateful lungs of air. The lack of pain was hard to quantify, but I became aware over time that it wasn't just the sudden burning that had gone away. The everyday pain I had gotten used to, the inflamed joints and the deep ache of weakened bones, was also gone. It was like someone had flipped a switch in me, and suddenly I was exactly like I'd been before. This may seem like a small thing, but when you've lived with the pain, made it a day-to-day part of your life, its absence is like a physical loss. It was like a kid who's had his tooth pulled, his tongue prodding at the vacancy where something solid had been before. When he spoke, I had to shake myself back to reality to ask him to repeat himself. We will see you in 2 weeks for your next treatment. The nurse will give you a prescription when you leave. Take it twice a day in order to keep your body from rejecting the treatment. Understand? I nodded, still a little dazed, and agreed to take the pills. I made another appointment with the similarly pretty brunette and took the nondescript little bag she handed me. She smiled, saying they would see me in 2 weeks, and I headed home. As I drove home, I expected the pain to rear its head again with every press of a pedal or turn of the wheel. The pain had become like a swarm of gnats, ever present and buzzing. You never got used to it, but you became accustomed to it. It's never comfortable, but you look forward to the times when it isn't there. Now, it was just gone. I was driving with nary a pain or a wince. something I hadn't done in years. I should have been happy, but I kept waiting for it to disappear. Maybe that made me a pessimist, but I don't care. When you live like this long enough, you constantly wait for the other shoe to drop. I walked into my house, my bones still feeling like nothing so much as normal bones, and took the pills out of the bag. Reading over the label for side effects or warnings, I found nothing but the instructions on the outside. No name, no ingredients, no warnings, just 8 words in bold font. Take 1 pill, with food, twice a day. I opened the bottle and let a few of the pills roll onto my palm. They were white and blue gel capsules, the contents looking like nothing so much as the sugar on top of the snow caps my husband ate at the movies. As they sat in my hand, I noticed that they were oddly cold to the touch, and the feeling reminded me of the way the liquid had felt as it entered my IV. When they didn't immediately appear dangerous or try to bite me, I let them tumble back into the bottle and closed the lid. I set a reminder on my phone for 7 a.m. and started fixing dinner. When I went to bed that night, I had already forgotten about them, but as I pulled the blankets up around myself, I felt a sudden chill arrow through me. It should have raised a sort of red flag, but I was still riding the high of moving about my home without any of the pain from earlier that day. A few hours later, though, I was awoken by an icy chill going through my body, followed by an intense ache in my joints. As I tried to get up, I felt every bone in my body tighten. It was almost impossible to walk, but after a few minutes, it eased up, and I was able to make it to the bathroom. I figured this was just a side effect of the stiffness the doctor was talking about. And after a warm bath, some of the pain had abated. With some of my mobility returned, I shuffled back to bed, hoping to sleep off the pain until it was time for my first dose of medication. The next day, the pain of the night before was a fleeting memory, and I took my first pill and started getting ready for my day. It usually took me several hours to get my legs to cooperate enough to make breakfast, but today I moved about my kitchen the way I hadn't in years. My joints felt fluid, my bones were as forgettable as they should be, and when I woke my husband up for work at 10, he looked at me a little shocked to find breakfast already on the table, and the kitchen dishes cleaned and put away. "Wow, those treatments really did the trick," he said, taking my hands in his big calloused ones, intent on kissing them. He dropped them in surprise as a shudder ran through him. "Geez, babe, your hands are so cold." There was worry on his face, but I waved his worries away and told him it was nothing. "It's just a side effect of the treatment. I'm fine, sweetie." Deep down, though, I was worried. I should have called the doctor's office right then and there and told them about the side effects. After the weirdness that had happened the night before, I should have been more concerned, but it all comes back to one thing. Despite the stiffness, despite the cold hands, despite the next 2 weeks where sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night and hobbled into a warm bath, the intense pain in my bones was all but a distant memory. I would have given anything to be done with the pain like that, and it turned out the cost was more than I could have known. 2 weeks later, I arrived at my next appointment. I was curious to see if it hurt the same way it had the time before, but my reasons for going were twofold. I had taken the last of my pills that morning, and I knew that I would need more if I wanted to maintain this lack of joint pain. So I smiled at the nurse, let them strap me down again, let them slide the needle into my arm, and breathed in the gas like the good doctor told me to. The treatment was performed the same as the first, but I gritted my teeth through the pain as I waited for him to inject my IV with that sweet icy liquid as the gas did its work. As the straps slid off, I nodded through the closing instructions and shuffled up to the desk to make my appointment and get my pills. I moved as if in a dream, my body feeling strangely heavy as I climbed into my car and drove home. I jerked awake in my driveway, unsure how I had arrived home. I had never fallen asleep at the wheel, much less sleep drove home, and the thought made me shiver. I grabbed my prescription and headed inside, wanting to get as far from the vehicle as possible at that moment. I thought about starting dinner as I trudged in, but decided to take a nap instead. It was early still, only mid-afternoon, but I was suddenly exhausted. I could barely keep my eyes open, and as I slid into bed wearing the same clothes I'd left the house in, I thought I was settling in for nothing but a couple hours of rest. 10 hours later, I shuddered awake into total darkness as an arctic chill shot through my nerve endings. It was worse than it had ever been, worse than any time before it, and as I tried to climb out of bed, my legs froze up and sent me spilling to the floor. I lay there, unable to bend my legs or arms, only able to pull them towards me like palsied claws. I was overjoyed when I heard my husband's soft snores from the bed beside me. He would help me. He would get me to the hospital. He could get me into a warm bath, and I opened my mouth to scream his name. My lips trembled as I prepared to cry out for him, but no sound escaped my chilly maw. I gasped weakly, his name lost amongst the short barks of sound, while he slept peacefully a few feet away. I lay there with tears of fear dripping down my face, certain that he would wake up the next morning to find me dead. I almost expected to see them freeze against my cheeks, but they did little more than pool beneath my head and wet the side of my face. I spent that night drifting in and out of my new painful existence. It felt like I lay there for weeks, listening to the content snores of my spouse as my body was racked with freezing chills. I thought I would die again and again, and as the sun began to rise, I almost wished for it. The colder I became, the less the shivers seemed to blow through me. I still felt them, but my body had stopped responding. I was powerless to move, incapable of doing much besides watching the sunrise and the day begin. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because when my husband yelled my name, my eyes were startled open. What the hell is this? But he seemed to lose his words as he stood over me. I mouthed at him, asking him to help me, but he looked unsure. I don't know how. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but instead he turned to my vanity and fetched a small hand mirror. I looked back at myself, not sure it was me for a moment. I was looking at a perfect china doll as she lay curled up on the floor. Her skin was a perfect alabaster, broken only by the slight spider cracks that ran through it. As I watched, another chill coursed through me, and I saw the cracks lengthen as my fragile form tried to shiver. I wanted to cry, but I had no tears left. Instead, I told him to put the phone next to me and put it on text-to-speech. I wanted him to understand, wanted to explain how this had happened, while I could still explain anything. He did as I asked, saying he would go get help, but I don't think he'll be back in time. It took a surprisingly short time to lay it all out, but I can feel the change beginning to affect my face now. My blinks are becoming slower and slower, and my throat's beginning to tighten as it stiffens like my skin. My lips have started to flake as I speak, the cracks in my arms likely running through the lips my husband loved to kiss. I'll be nothing but a beautiful statue soon, a curiosity piece for people to speculate over. But with the time I have left, I want people to understand how I came to this point. I don't know if it was the treatment or the pills, maybe it was both, but it doesn't appear to be ready for human trials. If they ask you to sign your life away as I did, make sure you know what you're agreeing to. The short respite from pain wasn't worth the hell I found myself in now. It's getting hard to breathe now. My lungs are laboring to pull in breath, and I can feel the same shivering running through them with every gasping pull. My eyes are fixed forward, my fingers forever locked together, and I feel that every word may be my last. If you make it home, Jason, know that I love you, and I'm sorry that this is where we must part.
They say hope comes in all forms, but I'm really not certain that's the way I want my hope packaged. Coming up next, we have a classic about something many people wish they could get a little bit more of. Maybe a word with a relation that's no longer with us. Maybe just a moment to say goodbye. Let's hear a story about final thoughts.
We'd like to thank our sponsor, Final Thoughts. Final Thoughts would like to give our listeners a 10% discount on their premium package. Wouldn't you like the peace of mind of hearing from your loved ones just one last time? Well, at Final Thoughts, they can... Mark spooled the volume down as he waited for the commercial to end and his podcast to pick back up. He glanced out the window and was greeted by another sign for Final Thoughts. The company was barely a year old, and already they were everywhere. He turned the podcast back up, but wasn't really paying attention anymore. The traffic moved sluggishly around him, like an artery clogged with plaque. He just knew that it would make him late for dinner, and then Lisa would be upset. She hated it when he was late for dinner. The words of the host were cut off suddenly, as his phone chirped and displayed Lisa's picture on the screen. Mark sighed. She was probably calling to ask when he'd be home. She wouldn't be happy when he told her he was going to be late. He'd worked late every day this week, and she had probably made a big surprise dinner for Friday. He considered ignoring it, but knew that would just lead to a bigger fight. He caught it on the fifth ring. "Hey, hun," he said, trying to sound chipper. "Hi, sweetie." Her voice put Mark on edge. They'd been married almost 7 years, and he'd learned how to read her reasonably well in the early parts of their relationship. Her voice was high, unnaturally sweet, and he could already tell that something was wrong. This was the voice she used when she was upset and trying not to show it, when she had bad news but didn't want to tell it. He almost thought he could hear her holding back tears, but didn't want to say so. "Lisa, is everything okay?" How was your day? Did you make any big sales?" That took Mark aback. Lisa wasn't usually interested in his work. "Yeah, I made a few big sales. Mr. Copeland said I'm likely a shoo-in for Employee of the Month." That's fantastic, dear. I'm so proud of you." When she said it, there was a slight wince at the end of the word, and Mark could still swear that she was trying not to cry. She was acting strangely. What was going on over there? As Mark sat in bumper-to-bumper traffic, he couldn't help but imagine that someone with a gun was in his house, telling his wife to call him. Maybe someone had died, Mark thought, and she was trying not to tell him until he got home. As the car ahead moved, Mark took his foot off the brake and accelerated forward enough to stop again. Just up ahead, he could see a road worker holding a sign. This was the gatekeeper for a stretch of road laden with roadmen and trucks. This was the source of the traffic, and Mark cursed loudly, realizing that this would take the better part of an hour to get through. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Lisa asked, in that same overly chipper voice that verged on breaking. "Oh, it's road work, babe. Looks like I won't be home for dinner for at least an hour." She made a sound, and to Mark it sounded like a sob. "Oh, I'm sorry, hon. I was hoping you were a little closer. I had something I needed to tell you." Her words broke apart as she spoke, and Mark was getting kind of worried about what was going on at home. "Lisa, is something wrong? You sound like you're barely able to stop yourself from crying. What's going on?" "I promise you won't get mad. I don't want the last thing I hear to be the sound of you mad." Her words sent a chill through him. "The last thing you hear? What are you talking about?" She paused for a moment, seeming to choose her words carefully before continuing. "Mark, honey, there was an accident." "An accident? What happened?" A car beeped at him, and Mark jittered forward a little bit. He had expected to hear that someone had died, that dinner was burnt, maybe that there was a bill that had come in and it was really bad. He had thought maybe there was a home invader or a kidnapping plot. He had thought of 1,000 different things, but her being hurt was never one of them. Lisa rarely left the house. When she did, it was always to her destination and back again. Lisa's parents had been killed in a car accident about 10 years ago, and it had all but made her a shut-in. "I don't want to talk about it. Can't we just make our last conversation a happy one? I don't want you to remember me like this after I'm gone," she said, finally breaking down. Mark could hear her crying on the other end, and the sound was too much. When the car beeped at him this time, he ignored it. Mark had already stripped off his seatbelt and was climbing out of his vehicle. The driver blared his horn and yelled at him, but Mark didn't care. He was running up the sidewalk, phone pushed against his ear, as he ran for their apartment. His apartment wasn't far from the office, but he always drove because he didn't want to arrive with his suit smelling of sweat in the street. He had always considered the 30 minutes to an hour it took him to get home as his time. Now he just wanted to get home before his wife breathed her last. "What happened, dear? Just keep talking to me." Her voice was becoming weaker, but he craved it like a starving man wants a slice of bread. I was dusting the lights. I dust them every Friday. They get so dirty during the week. I was up on a stepladder, and I guess one of the brackets snapped. I fell and hit my head on the table. I saw the blood on the floor and knew it was bad. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm such a klutz. Don't be sorry, he said as he ran up the street. People moved out of his way or they were knocked aside. A woman fell on the curb and her angry voice followed Mark as he ran. Mark passed a policeman and the man tried to stop him. He juked around him and kept running. His apartment was only 3 blocks away and he knew he could make it. I'm scared, Mark. That gave him a burst of speed. Just hold on. I'm almost there, he huffed as he ran across the street, the sound of horns blaring behind him. I feel cold. Please, stay with me, Lisa, he almost cried, tears dripping down his face onto the phone. He could see their apartment building as it loomed in the distance. The gray facade had never looked better to him, and he knew it was only a block away. He ran flat out, his suit coat billowing behind him, his button-up hanging long around his waist. He looked crazed, but he didn't care. He was going to see her. He was going to save her. He was going to be there for her. Mark, she gasped. Her voice had become as fragile as glass. I'm here, honey. There's an ambulance outside the complex, as well as several police cars. What's going on? Has someone called for help? Why didn't you say so? I just wanted to let you know my time's almost up. His breath hitched in. Don't talk like that. We'll have more time. I see paramedics outside. They must be here for you. No, they've already come and got me, Mark. He stopped as he watched them roll out a gurney with a black bag on it. The bag was zipped up, the contents not moving. The paramedics loaded it into the back of an ambulance and closed the door. They rolled away without ever seeing Mark at all. You're hearing my voice because I signed up for Final Thoughts. I know you don't like them, but I wanted you to have some closure if something ever happened to me. I remember how much it messed me up when my parents died, and I never got to say goodbye. I've only got about a minute left, Mark, but I want to tell you that I love you, and I'll always love you. Mark stood on the sidewalk as the cold numbness rushed over him. He was hearing her voice for the last time. She was already gone, already dead, and now he was listening to the last words she would ever say. This was grisly. It was a joke. How could they put a time limit on how long he could spend with his wife? Mark, she whispered, her voice a thin edge of dandelion fluff. He swallowed his emotion. This was his wife's final moments. He didn't want them to be meaningless. I love you too, Lisa. I've always loved you. Goodbye, Mark. I love you, she whispered. She sounded happy. The line went dead.
Kind of a bittersweet tale. One where you get what you want, but it isn't always the way that you want it. Moving right along, we have another story about loss. This one a little more personal. It's the loss of innocence, the loss of home, and a man who finds what might be considered someone's baby pictures in his new place of residence. Let's hear a story about frozen in time.
My parents moved when I was a senior in high school. Not all at once, they moved in stages, and I was allowed to watch the house while they took their things a little at a time to their new house. This was great for me because I had a steady girlfriend and a group of friends who would regularly stay at the house with me. My parents had a huge house, and as long as I didn't wreck it, they didn't really care what I did. As long as I cut the grass and fed the dogs, they sent me money for groceries and let me carry on. It was a very interesting time in my life, and it lasted until I was nearly 20. By the time they were ready to move, my life had kind of fallen apart. My girlfriend had met someone at work, and I caught her cheating, and told her that we were done. My friends either started college or started jobs, and didn't really have time for hanging out at a friend's house, who did nothing but watch his parents' home. I saw less and less of them, and and had less and less company to speak of, so when my parents made me the offer to come with them, I did. There wasn't a lot for me to do in my old town, so I packed up and moved to this place. They had been slowly transitioning into for the last 2 years. The house was actually a lot nicer than the one that they had moved out of. The old house had been big, but it was old and in disrepair. The yard was also pretty large and required a lot of mowing, even in the winter months, given where we lived. The new house was just as big, but had a stone fireplace and hardwood floors and a much smaller yard than the old house. My brother, a few years younger than me, enjoyed the new school, and my parents had moved into new jobs in the community. They told me that it would be much easier for me to start college here, but until then, I could get a job in town to supplement my income. It all sounded fine to me, so I settled into one of the upstairs rooms, and that was where I saw the ghost. Ghost might be too grand a term. It wasn't some spectacular phantasm or some dripping corpse moaning up the halls. It looked like one of the cheap ghosts from a low-budget movie, but it was certainly enough to scare the bejesus out of me. The first couple of nights I spent in the house, I was too tired to do much besides moving my things and falling into bed. The third night, however, was a little different. I had spent the third day in town looking for work and had figured that I was going to have a harder time finding work here than my parents. Unless I wanted to work in retail or fast food, I was going to need to look somewhere else, but that was fine with me. I'd seen on the television that there were a couple of hospitals the next town over, and they were always looking for someone to work in IT or at the switchboard. So that night, I fell into bed, but woke up a little after midnight to a strange sound in my room. My room was huge. It was 12 by 15, with a bed and a desk and a closet, but there was only one window, and it was facing out on the front yard. That time of night, the moon was coming in to light the section of floor where I had laid a rug and a coat rack, and that was where I saw it. At first I thought it might be one of the coats I had hung on the rack, but when it turned, I knew it was something a little different. It looked like a girl, about 15 or 16, made out of TV static. She was looking around, calling for her mother, and hadn't seemed to have noticed me at all. I lay in bed, full of fear and wondering just what the hell was going on, when she suddenly looked at the door, and her sorrow turned into fear. She started to shake, backing away from something, and before she disappeared, she screamed and vanished in a puff of static. It was the strangest thing that I'd ever seen, and as I laid there in bed, I think I convinced myself that I had just imagined it, or it was a dream. I had never had any trouble believing in the paranormal before, but this felt different somehow. This felt like a video or a projection, and I wasn't sure I really believed in it as something other than that. It was just a dream, some trick of the light, nothing more, and I rolled over as I faced the wall and tried to get back to sleep. The next night, however, I woke up around the same time with a tickling feeling on the back of my neck. I was facing the wall that night, sleeping pretty soundly, when all of a sudden it was like insects crawling across my skin. I slapped at my neck, and when I did not get the crunch of an insect, I turned over to check behind me. There she was again, the girl that I had seen the night before. She was standing in roughly the same place and mouthing fearfully at something that I couldn't see. She did this for a minute before turning our way and disappearing again. 2 nights in a row made it a little harder to push away as a dream or my imagination. I took my blanket and went to one of the other bedrooms upstairs, and thankfully I wasn't bothered by ghosts in any of them. I thought about just moving my stuff into one of the other rooms. My parents had said that I could have the old bunk room, but they hadn't said that I had to stay there. Still, I was curious now. This is some kind of mystery, and I really wanted to know how it ended. So the next day, when my mom got up to start cooking breakfast, she found me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. "Mom, are there any ghosts in this house?"
Mom laughed, and that immediately put me at ease. No, sweetie, the house was only built 20 years ago, and no one has died in it in those 2 decades. Unless you're seeing some kind of ghosts from the land, there certainly aren't any in the house. Some of you may be skeptical, but if my mom said that there's no ghosts in the house, then I believe her. Mom is one of those ghost hunter fanatics. She watches the shows, she goes on ghost tours, and she generally believes in most of the spooky stuff that you see on TV. It's not just that she believes in Bigfoot and aliens, and I'm pretty sure that Mulder is her spirit animal. So, for her to tell me so distinctly that there were no ghosts made me think that I must have been wrong. I must have had a bad dream, like I thought. I decided to go back to the bunk room. It had the best light during the day and the best access to air conditioning, and went about my day as usual. I stayed up a little bit late that night, playing games with some people online and generally goofing off. So when I felt that tickle on the back of my neck again, I looked and saw the ghost girl standing not too far behind me. I nearly fell out of my chair, and some of the language I used probably would have made my parents pretty unhappy. She was still standing there, cringing and talking, but saying nothing. Then, after about 10 to 15 minutes, she disappeared, and I was in an empty room again. When Mom came downstairs that morning and found me at the table again, she laughed loud enough to make my dad ask if she was okay. "What's wrong, kid? Ghosts keeping you up again?" "Kinda," I told her, and I told her what had happened. She listened. Like I said, Mom was really into all the ghost hunting stuff, but after I finished, all she could do was shrug. "I don't know what to tell you. The realtors have to disclose if anyone died in the house, at least for the last 10 years, and I asked. You know me, I've always wanted to live in my own little haunted house, and the lady assured me that no one had died in the home, so no ghosts, though it wasn't for a lack of trying." I thought about that for a moment. Well, what happened to the previous owners of the house? Mom turned her back on me so that she could stir grits and seemed to contemplate how much to tell me. "Well, from what the realtor told us, the family that lived here before us built the house and another house in the valley below it. The down below is technically ours. We just don't know what we're going to do with it yet. There used to be a house down there, but it burned down before the family that built the house moved out." "But what happened to the family?" "She didn't say," Mom said, "but she did tell us that no one had died in the house that anyone was aware of." I thought about it, but realized that she had omitted something. "What about the house that used to be in the down below?" Mom was quiet, and then I guess she decided to stop being so cagey. The family that lived there died in the fire, and the fire was set under some pretty mysterious circumstances. I don't really want to talk about this first thing in the morning. It's kind of a sad topic to start the day with. I decided to let it go for now, but I also thought it might be time to do some research. I had the day off, no applications to put in or financial aid to seek, so I went to the library and decided to see if I could find any information about my parents' new home. There was a little bit in the local paper. It talked about the house fire that had killed the Maynard family, Mr. and Mrs. Maynard and their young daughter, but it didn't mention much else besides the fact that Mr. Maynard had a brother. The article didn't say too much about him, but I suppose that he could have been the one that built the house. There was nothing else in the paper about the incident or occurrences at my parents' house, so I decided it might be time to speak to the source. The small town my parents had moved to was little more than a 2-stoplight town, but they had a small paper that ran the local events and a small bit of local gossip. The town crier had an editor and 2 writers on staff, and when I asked who had done the story about the fire at the Maynard house, they directed me to a man with thick glasses and a tweed jacket. He looked more like an English professor than a column writer, and after shaking my hand and hearing what I was after, he looked like I had force-fed him a lemon. "Yes, the Maynard fire was a tragedy, to be sure. Happened almost 10 years ago, and it was one of the first stories I covered. Did you have some questions about it or something?" I told him my parents had bought the other house on the lot, and I was looking for information about the previous owners. He took his glasses off and wiped them, but it amounted to the same thing that my mother had told me. He was stalling, trying to figure out the best way to tell me something that he didn't want me to know. and trying to figure out how much of it to tell me so that I would go away. There was more than just a house fire here, and I was beginning to suspect that it was something the town didn't want to talk about. Let me give you a piece of advice. This is one sleeping dog you need to let lie. It happened a long time ago, and the people involved are just trying to get on with their lives. Leave it alone, for the good of those that are still alive. I thanked him for his time and his candor, but I think his warning just made me more interested. I decided to swing by the realty office to talk to the woman who had sold them the house, and they had a few more people than the paper. The realtor, Marjorie, was out, but I told them I'd wait, and after about 20 minutes, she came back and handed the receptionist some papers before the woman pointed me out. Marjorie smiled, but I got the feeling that she didn't really want to talk to me either. "You must be one of the new owners of the Maynard place. I hope everything is going well." I assured her that my parents were very happy with the house, but I was looking for a little more info on the place. I lied and told her that I'd found something written on the inside of a closet, and I was just curious about the previous owners. When she asked what I had found, I told her it was gibberish, and I was just wondering if someone was in the occult or something. No, not that I know of. The Maynards left about 6 months after the fire, but their daughter was normal enough from what I remember. So do they still live in town then? I'm sorry, that's not something I'm at liberty to talk about. Regardless, the Maynard family is fine, and I don't think you should bother them if that's what you intend to do. They have suffered a lot after the fire, and they'd rather be left in peace. She seemed to realize that she had said too much after she finished and excused herself, saying that she needed to get back to work. I left the realty company, feeling like I'd taken 1 step forward and 5 steps back. I had more questions than answers, but I was really wondering if I could get to the bottom of this. Ghost girls aside, this mystery had its hooks in me, and I felt like the town had a vested interest in keeping something a secret. I headed back to the library, trying to find the threads again, and that's when I remembered what the writer had said. He said the fire had happened about 10 years ago, and the realtor had said they moved out of the house less than a year later. If the Maynard kids had gone to school around here, maybe I could find something with those dates and years. It was vague, and it made me feel a little creepy, but it was all I had to run with. It took a while, and I think the librarian thought I was a weirdo, but I finally discovered something. A news article about a local fundraiser had made me feel cold as a picture of the students involved scuttled across. It was the 4-H Club's annual farm auction, something they did in the spring. Now, one of the smiling girls was hugging a lamb and looking into the camera with frozen joy. It was the same girl from my nightly haunting, and the name underneath gave me a name to go along with the face. Stacy Maynard, 15, poses with her prized winning lamb, Chumley. The realtor had let it slip that they lived in town, so a quick search of the yellow pages, and I discovered that she had been right. She was still in town, living in the Masterly Hedge Apartments. And after Googling the address, I worried over the idea of talking to her. Everyone else in town had turned me down cold when I kept up my questions, so who knew what this woman would say when I asked her? I tapped my pen as I looked at the address, finally deciding to give it a shot. What did I have to lose, right? She was out on her porch when I pulled up, the little patio off the side of the apartment, holding quite a few plants. She was watering them, her blonde hair sticking out the back of her baseball cap, and she looked up as I approached. She looked a lot like the girl from my room, the way a mother might look like their child, and I think she saw something on my face as she asked if she could help me. She looked like the realtor and the writer, polite, but apprehensive. "I was hoping to talk to you about something. It's going to sound strange, but you've been haunting my house." She raised an eyebrow at me, laughing nervously. That's a new one, but it's still a pretty sloppy pickup line. No, I'm sorry, I'm making a mess of this. Did you used to live at 563 Sorora Street? That seemed to make her nervous. Yeah? Why? My family lives there now. I stay in the upstairs room, the one with the window facing the front of the house, and every night there's a ghost girl that looks a lot like you. She stays for a few minutes, she never says anything, and then she disappears. The longer I went on, the less impressed the woman looked. Uh-huh. Okay, well, I think it's time for you to go now. This is all very interesting, but I'm not really interested in whatever this is. She started to go back inside, and I tried my best to find something to prove I wasn't just being a creep. The girl looks like she's about 15, and she looks terrified. She keeps calling for her mother while she watches the door. She looks absolutely terrified. I just wanted to know why she was so scared. She had been halfway through the door, but she stopped. And she turned around to look at me. How do you know that? No one would be able to know that. I was by myself that night, but she shook her head, realizing what she had said. She stood there for a moment, contemplating what to do with this stranger that had wandered up all of a sudden, before finally deciding to invite me in. Sit here on the porch, she said, as she headed inside. I'm going to get tea. I feel like I need something stronger, and I'm out of everything but cooking sherry. I parked it on one of the plastic chairs that she had on the porch, and when she came back with a jug of tea and 2 glasses, I thanked her. You aren't the first person to come to talk to me. What happened was a town secret, but there were definitely people who wanted the real story. I swore I'd never talk about it again, but it kind of feels like you're part of this, and that's not your fault. So I'm going to tell you what happened, and when I'm done, I don't want to talk about it again. Do you understand? After this, I don't want to talk about this ever again. I nodded, taking a sip of tea as she emptied her own glass and refilled it. Okay, so my dad and my uncle got the land from my grandpa. They had shared it, and my uncle wanted to build his house in the valley, while Daddy wanted to put a house on the hill. They were co-owners in a moving company, and they were doing pretty well. They were close, thick as thieves, but they couldn't have been more different. My uncle was a loving man, affectionate and supportive, but Daddy was a monster. He made life hell for my sister and my mother, but especially for me. I was his oldest daughter, and I seemed to get the brunt of his anger. He beat us. He yelled at us. He did... She closed her eyes and shook a little. Other things to us, but we were all too scared to say anything to anyone. But that's not why you're here, though. But I guess it is, too. That moment you're talking about was one of the last times he hurt me. The time before someone did something about it. She looked at the tea glass, watching the ice cubes rattle around before continuing. Daddy and my uncle were fighting a lot before he died. He found out that Daddy had been taking money from the business, and he wanted him to give it back. Daddy refused, but my uncle had threatened to turn him into the police or something. I heard only snippets of their fight, or fights over the phone, that I only got one part of. But one night, Daddy decided to do something about it. I remember waking up to see my uncle's house burning, but I think I knew he was already dead. Daddy had killed him, killed my aunt and my cousin too, and I think the town knew it too. They couldn't prove it. Daddy had covered his tracks, but they remembered when he was younger, and they knew he was a monster when he grew up to be a bigger monster. They had seen the bruises on my mother and on us, and they had seen the animals dumped in the gutter near his house sometimes, and they knew it couldn't go on much longer. Then one night, he gave them their reason. Mom was at work. I'd come home early from a 4-H event, and Daddy was waiting for me. He asked what I'd been doing, asked why I was out so late, and when I told him, he called me a liar and a lot of other things. He tried to put his hands on me, and I had a momentary lapse in sanity. Maybe not. Maybe I just had had enough of being beaten, but regardless, I pulled away and ran upstairs. I slammed the door, pushed the dresser in front of it, and just screamed for my mother. I was terrified of what I had done. I knew that when he got inside, he was going to really let me have it this time. He was going to beat me, and there was nothing I could do about it. I called out for my mom. I begged her to come home and save me, but when the door opened with a crash, I couldn't do anything but hunker against the wall and accept my punishment. It wasn't punishment, though. It was just violence. I think that was when I realized that he was never actually punishing me, never delivering anything for my own good, and I slipped into unconsciousness. That didn't stop him, though. I woke up in the hospital, my mom crying as she told me how sorry she was, promising that nothing like this would ever happen again. I found out later that she had come home to find me unconscious. My dad was downstairs watching TV like nothing had happened, while I lay in a puddle of blood and fought for my life. She called an ambulance, and the police had been called, and my daddy was arrested. They took him to jail, and he claimed that he had done nothing. They had no proof that he had beaten me, no more proof than they had that he had burned down my uncle's house and killed his family. But the people of the town were tired of suffering him. While I was in the hospital, a mob came to the house and took him away. I don't know what they did to him, and I don't want to know, but he never bothered us again. He'd killed his brother and gotten away with it, and he'd beaten his wife and children for years, and they had ignored it. But putting me in the hospital seemed to be their tipping point. So that's what happened. I don't know why you can see it, but that was the moment that caused it. We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves and the potted plants whisper. And when I thanked her for the tea, I took my leave. To this day, I don't know why the girl appears in the room every night, but knowing what brought it on, I also don't much care. I've been back to visit Miss Maynard a few times since, and we've become pretty good friends. I also moved my stuff into the room across the hall, and I'm happy to report that no phantoms take up residence in there, at least not that I've found. I don't know if the wood in the room is so porous that it soaks up memories, or if what happened that night was so terrible that it made an impression, but the girl, to my knowledge, still appears around midnight before disappearing. I've slept sounder since I moved across the hall, and I have no intention of moving back.
Sometimes the best stories are the ones with just a hint of truth to them. Moving right along, we have a story about, what else? A marriage. It's our last one, so we're going to go out strong with a story about wedded bliss that maybe isn't as blissful as he believes. Let's hear a story about how his marriage was perfect, except for one little thing.
She was the perfect woman. I have no idea how I managed to catch her attention. Our relationship, our marriage, it was all perfect, except for one thing that neither of us could have foreseen. We met in college. She was working towards her English degree, and I was studying business. My major required me to take an English course, as did hers, and when she asked if the desk next to mine was taken, I was almost too stunned to answer. Kathy was beautiful in that artless way that some women have, and she smiled as I fumbled over my answer. That would have been the end of it for most people. I had fumbled my one chance, but Kathy wasn't like other women. She told me later that she had found it endearing, and she suspected that she was already a little bit taken with me when she sat down. When I saw you from across the room, I just knew that I wanted to get to know you better. We talked a little bit before class, comparing schedules and going over the usual getting-to-know-you chit-chat. When the teacher arrived and class began, I found myself snatching little glances at her as she bent over her notebook. She caught me looking once, and to my surprise, I saw her smile at me. I was smitten after that smile, and when Kathy invited me to have lunch with her after class, I didn't even have to think about it. We were dating a week later, and as we got closer, should have noticed the warning signs of problems to come. I suppose I understand how it escaped my notice, though. Few people would have considered utter peace and pure relaxation a problem. When we walked hand in hand, I would get this feeling of utter peace throughout my body. When we kissed, I felt like nothing in the world could hurt me. She made me feel safe, made my problems melt away, and I knew I wanted more than the few hours a day we got to share with each other. Her college schedule made it difficult to go out more than twice a week, and my own class load kept me busy too. Part of the reason we had such little time together, though, was Kathy's commute to and from school. Kathy lived an hour and a half from campus, and couldn't begin to afford an apartment on her meager student income. The job I worked, plus the leftover grant money I had, paid the rent on my studio apartment, but not much else. Another person paying rent was nice, but I couldn't say that was the only reason that I offered to let her live with me. I also wanted her close to me. She made me feel good, made me feel safe. Being in her presence made the dark world in which I lived more tolerable, and I wanted that for more than a few hours a week. I offered to let her move in, and after a week of mulling it over, she agreed. That weekend, we combined our meager possessions, and I slept like a baby in her arms that night. As we began to spend our evenings together, the problems became more apparent. Problems is a terrible word for it, because in the beginning, it was more like a godsend. When we sat on the couch, our hands linked, I would find myself getting drowsy. When we would cuddle on the couch, our bodies pressed together, I would lose minutes at a time, and my eyes would grow heavier and heavier. The feeling of peace I found in her presence put me at ease, and that ease led to some of the best sleep of my life. I would sleep more deeply than I ever had before, and wake up after 8 hours refreshed and ready to start my day. Kathy seemed pleased with the attention. She'd only been with one other person before we started dating, but I could tell that she wondered why I hadn't slept with her yet. Some women's feelings would have been hurt by this, but Kathy had been raised in a very religious household, and must have assumed that I was simply waiting till marriage. The truth was that, while I would have loved to have slept with her, the sleeping was the problem. Whenever we got close, my arms around her and our bodies pressed together, I would find myself blinking and suddenly losing long periods of time. Sometimes she would lead me to bed, sometimes she would just sleep with me on the couch, but I would always wake up next to Kathy with a deep feeling of fulfillment. I had assumed that she was feeling the same way. I often thought that maybe this was the feeling that we gave each other, and it made me feel good to bring her the same sort of peace that she brought me. This went on for about 6 months, and I thought that things were going well. We went out to dinner, we had friends over, we went on dates, and seemed to be living together with few problems. I had been tentatively looking at rings, preparing to pop the question and make it official. Besides the matter of intercourse, I thought we were happy. Then one evening I came home from class to find her crying on the couch. I hadn't seen her that day. She'd been absent from the one class we had together, and when I'd called her, she said she was feeling sick. It was nothing serious. She maybe had a cold or something. I'd told her to feel better, hanging up so that I could get to my next class. But as I saw her looking up from her cupped hands, I knew something was definitely wrong. I had never seen her cry before, and it was so alarming that I could do little else but go to her and wrap my arms around her. She wouldn't tell me what was wrong, but I wish now that I had pressed her. I wrapped her in my reassuring arms and tried my best to comfort her in her time of need. My reassuring arms quickly turned into drawing her close and wiping her tears away. This soon led to kissing, which led to touching, and then to the bedroom. I won't bore you with the details, but I think you know how it ended up. I woke up the next day, her hands lightly stroking my hair, and fresh tears running down her cheeks. It was our first time, and I couldn't even remember how it had gone. When I asked her to marry me a month later, she seemed overjoyed. We had been living together for half a year now, and our love for one another was pretty clear. She wore my engagement ring with pride, showing it off to her friends, and we began to plan our wedding. I was too blind to see that she was making appointments with a campus therapist more often than she used to. I was too comfortable to notice the tears that sometimes came to her while we lay in bed together. I was too wrapped up in my own feelings to notice the prescriptions that appeared in the medicine cabinet. I was just so comfortable that I never wanted it to end. It's easy to get tunnel vision when you're spending all your time in the tunnel of love, I suppose. After that first time, however, I did make efforts to be better in the bedroom. Kathy was patient with me, seeing that I was trying, but I often found myself trying one moment and waking up the next. She was always quick to reassure me that it was nothing to be ashamed about, but I knew it hurt her deeply to have a partner incapable of being intimate with her. So, I set out to find the reason for my sleeping fits. And so, I began to make doctor's appointments of my own. I said that the appointments were for her benefit, but I was honestly more concerned that I might have a real problem brewing. The last thing I wanted to discover at 22 was that I was a narcoleptic or had a problem with my brain or something. I explained what was happening to my doctor, and he was helpful, if not a little over-jovial. Kids your age shouldn't be having any sort of problems in that department, but we'll get you checked out, he assured me, with a smile and a pat on the shoulder. I was tested for every sleep disorder imaginable. I was given prescriptions of my own, but none of them seemed to work. I took supplements, signed up for new drugs that had just hit the market, and joined medical test groups. Despite all this, though, no one seemed to have any answer for what was going on. I was just so comfortable with my fiancée that I couldn't help but fall asleep in her arms. It would have been sweet if it wasn't worrying me to no end. We had decided on March for our wedding, the first anniversary of our meeting, and I was determined to make it special for her. I was as helpful and dutiful as a boyfriend/fiancé could be. I went with her to every stage of the planning. I picked out cake toppers, helped with seating charts, picked out menus, visited and put down a deposit on the venue, and comforted my soon-to-be wife every step of the way. The saving grace, of course, was that I could put my performance issues down as pre-wedding jitters as the day crept closer and closer. The wedding was easily the happiest day of my life. I stood at the altar, sweating in my rented tux, waiting for the moment she would arrive. The crowd huddled behind me in a murmuring throng of excited tension, and it felt like 1,000 years had passed before the music began from the organist. When I saw her in her dress, gliding down the aisle like a dream, I fell in love all over again. She was beautiful, her tears now ones of joy, and I never regretted asking her to join her life to mine. We exchanged rings, spoke vows of eternal love, and then walked from the church as husband and wife. As we stood for pictures, the venue having set up on the lawn to host our reception, I made ready to fulfill my end of tonight. I drank champagne for toasts and black coffee by the cup. I took caffeine supplements before we climbed into the car and left for our honeymoon suite. As she went into the bathroom to take her dress off, I walked around and tried my best to keep my heart racing. I told myself over and over again that tonight would be different, that tonight would repay for all the rest. I wanted nothing but to make her feel special and to make tonight one to remember. When she came out of the bathroom, the two of us standing before each other as husband and wife, I felt like I was possessed with all the energy and serenity I would ever need. When we woke up the next morning, intertwined as we always were, there were no tears on her cheek, only a look of fulfillment I knew all too well. We settled into married life easily, and it was as though nothing had changed. Despite my best efforts, however, I couldn't recapture the magic of that night. Whenever I was in her arms, whenever we were close, I couldn't help but fall into that feeling of utter serenity and slip off to sleep. It was as if those feelings had multiplied after the wedding. She made me feel like I could die of happiness. I couldn't hold her hand as we drove anymore, lest I find myself listing off the road. If I cuddled on the couch with her to watch a movie, I would inevitably miss over half of it. I loved nothing more than to bask in that feeling of serenity that seemed to waft around her. But I also felt guilty as she seemed to return to her silent, tearful nature. I couldn't help myself. I was powerless to resist the pull of her, and I was powerless to do anything when I was in her arms. I began to notice as her mental health got worse, though. Kathy was moody and manic by turns. Sometimes she wanted nothing to do with me, only to cry and demand my attention. I often missed classes because I was afraid to leave her by herself, and I finally insisted that we go see a doctor. The doctor said this was normal. Her medication just needed to be adjusted. Despite their best efforts, though, the new pills and the adjustment of the old pills seemed to do no good. Our lovemaking was non-existent, despite my best efforts. I tried to comfort her, tried other means of intimacy, attended couples therapy with her, tried my best to keep her from imploding. In the end, though, it did no good. I remember the night it happened as vividly as I remember our wedding day. I was lying in bed, Kathy still in the bathroom, and I was worried about the appointment we had the next day. They planned to try her on a new battery of medications, and Kathy seemed to be willing to give it a try. She had wandered around the house like a fretful ghost all day, and I'd been keeping an eye on her until this very moment. I felt like if we could just get to bed, if we could just fall asleep in the comfortable embrace of each other's arms, everything would be fine. She climbed into bed, and something about her face didn't seem right to me. Then she opened her arms, and I was like a meteorite hurling into a planet's gravity. "I love you," she said, kissing my forehead as her heart raced against my chest. "I'll always love you." I fell asleep, wrapped in the arms of my love, sure that as long as I remained here, everything would be okay. I woke up, however, to discover that I was sleeping next to a corpse. I called the paramedics, but there was nothing they could do. She'd been dead for hours as I slept. Kathy had taken an overdose of sleeping pills before tucking in for the night. It was almost ironic in the end, and the note she had left on the nightstand told me everything I needed to know. All these years, I had believed that I was giving her the same feeling that she was giving me. It turned out I was nothing but a thief in the night. Kathy said that her mental decline had started almost the day we met. The balance and fulfillment that I had been expecting was a mirror to the anxiety that she was feeling. She had taken my inability to stay awake as something she was doing. She was boring me. I was disinterested. She was failing as a woman as a result. The longer it lasted, the more she felt like she was the cause. She wanted to please me, to be a good wife, but the longer it went on, the more inadequate she felt. She loved me. She never wavered in her love for me. But being with someone who was physically uninterested in her was killing her, physically and emotionally. She had finally decided that if sleeping next to her was what I wanted, then she would give me what I wanted. We would both sleep soundly for a change. I'm writing this as I sit in the viewing room of the funeral parlor. They gave me an hour before her cremation, a final viewing for her grieving husband. I could tell by the way they keep looking at me that I must look terrible. I've been awake for the past 5 days, and the bags under my eyes look more like suitcases. I've become accustomed to her presence, to the way she makes me feel, and now my sleep is all but non-existent. I'm like a junkie with no smack, and my fix lies in that box across the way, looking as lovely as the day we met. I think that when I get done with this, I may climb into that simple pine box with her and see if I can find some sleep. I can almost feel whatever she possesses from my seat here, and I want to see if she still possesses it, even in death. Who knows? Maybe I'll pull the lid closed behind me, and they'll simply slide me into the chute as well. It seems fitting somehow that the two of us should sleep forever, two souls at rest for all time.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, I'm sure we'll be back very soon with more cozy horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.